I want to thank everyone for inviting me here to this event. It's my first time to Boston. It's my first time to Harvard. I can't believe I'm here. In that it's one of these huge schools, right, in the world. And I'm going to be speaking to you about a group of women who have been vilified, erased, and ignored for the kinds of transformations they're thinking about when we think about business and society. And this is the banker ladies. They're going to teach us about love. They're going to talk about citational justice. And so I'm learning as a scholar how to do the work that I need to do to make sure that we're changing the ways in which we live. So I've been writing for the better part of a decade on economic development that goes outside of the Western world. There are scholars in business schools, economists, all kinds of political economists thinking about development and economics in new ways, right? So we can structure development and the ways in which we do business very different. So this term inclusive isn't just window dressing, but we're really tackling the structural inequalities that exist. What I'm going to speak to you a little bit about, it might be dry, and I'm going to try and race with the time so we catch up and we stay orderly. So what I'm going to speak about is the book that I'm currently working on, which is The Banker Ladies, the vanguards of the solidarity economies. I'm still working on my revisions. It feels like I've been working with peer review for 4 years. But I like to situate myself as a feminist and an economist and a political economist specifically, looking at, I come from Caribbean immigrants who migrated first to New York City, where I was born, and then I was raised in Toronto, Canada. Most of my life was precarious. We crisscrossed around the cities. So I'm very sort of attuned to the women that I'm working with. They're tough as nails. And I think when you grow up in that kind of filth, you become like that. And for 15 years, it's no mistake that I had to dedicate my life's work to trying to figure out what financial access and economic opportunity actually means. And I worked for a number of years doing that, mostly in Africa, parts of the Caribbean, specifically Haiti, and also with Lakshmi Ramrajan, who I want to thank her and Robin for inviting me. It's a really good opportunity to speak with you business leaders, because I hope you can help me translate what I'm going to share with you today. And I worked for this institution called OIC International out of Philadelphia, Germantown. And what they were doing was trying to co-opt development aid, African-American founded, led, and working in Africa, trying to think about how do we do economics differently. And I didn't realize at the time, but they were one of few institutions that was doing that kind of work globally. And what I learned from African Americans was how do we do business in a more equitable way? And that's what I'm going to speak about today. This whole theme is about, I can't believe that Harvard Business School is doing this, but it's about getting these tools to humanize economics, the human economy. And if Harvard can have a session here to do that, how can we trigger that effect to business schools and universities around, particularly in the West, right? That's what I'm going to speak about. I'm going to speak about this world system, capitalist system, that the banker ladies are actually pushing up against. Because equity and diversity means zero if you're still working through a racial capitalist system, right? And it's not about the reforming, it's actually about the transformation to create democracy within the businesses we want to see in our planet. So the system that I'm going to speak about are rotating savings and credit associations. I call them for short ROSCAs. How many people have heard of the term, these names, Susu, Patna, Box Hand? Yeah, okay, good. There's a few on this side. Any of these names resonate with you? These are names from the African diaspora. ROSCAs is actually an academic term to explain this global phenomenon, but people use their local vernacular to explain the kind of informal, cooperative money systems that they are using below the surface. But these names are so global. Indians have chit funds. Sri Lankans chitu, Indonesians have arisan, Chinese have hua. So it goes beyond the African diaspora. I'm fixated on the African diaspora. I'm a child of that community, so that's what I'm trying to amplify. And we're trying to figure out what kind of theory makes sense. In Canada, Europe, America, they use the term the social economy, often seeing people of color, Blacks, as on the receiving end of aid. But as you said, we've got to change the deficit framing to one of celebrity, because there are a lot of heroes and people who are protagonists in terms of changing the ways in which we do things. We're not just waiting on handouts. We're actually a part of the social economy, solidarity economy, building things differently. And that's what the women who organize these ROSCAs are called, the banker ladies, a name they call themselves. I didn't give it to them. And they're the chief organizers of these informal cooperative institutions. We're trying to find theory. We're trying to correct the citational blindness and exclusion that's happening. So everyone here has a lot of homework to do, because there is an abundance of Black political economy that can be useful in business schools, but people aren't citing those names. We decolonize syllabi in our writings, but we're not actually doing the homework of citing these Black scholars, indigenous scholars, who are writing on economics and political economy in ways that speak to the lived experience of the people we want to learn from. And my work is building on Jessica Gordon-Nembhard, an economist, political economist at CUNY, who's writing about the collective courage of African Americans in practice and thought of how we build cooperative institutions. A story that was completely obliterated and hidden because it was too dangerous to expose, actually, because what we want to do is preserve a certain model of business, right? We don't want to know that we can have membership-owned types of firms. My work relies a lot on the thinking of folks like Marcus Garvey, mainly because he had the foresight to think about new types of businesses, especially under extreme exclusion. And then, and more obscured economist by the name of C.Y. Thomas, who definitely mentored me, speaks to this idea of convergence theory. Why don't we focus on local consumption needs, the things that we need at the grassroots, and do away with all this world system extractive kinds of economic systems? Because when you play with them to do diversity, we're always amazed that this stuff is not working, allyship. Well, because look at the roots. Eric Williams wrote a book called Capitalism and Slavery, and how it was bound up in a very immoral origin. Why do we want to continue associating with that? So that's the literature that I use, because it needs to reflect on the experience of these women who are being constantly violated in the arenas that I work in, which is the Caribbean and two big cities in Canada, Toronto and Montreal, where we see the largest numbers of Black and African or Caribbean Canadians. And you see the numbers, it looks small, 400, but those are the chief banker ladies. Those are the ladies that are organizing these cooperatives that I'm speaking to solely. There are lots of stakeholders, but this is the group that I want to zero in for my book, because I think what they have to say are these words of wisdom of how we correct, economic exclusion. Multiply that number by at least a factor of 30, maybe 40. And that's modest, because in Haiti, these cooperative institutions are upwards of 100 or 200, right? I met a woman in Canada who has a Jiangji cooperative, money cooperative. She had 1,000 members across Canada. So, that's the extreme. This stuff is happening right now. In Boston, I'm gonna meet someone on Saturday who runs a Moziki bank here in Boston, Congolese American, has about 50 or 60 members at any given time. There's a divergence when I study women of the South and then those situated in the North. The story in Canada has been one to ignore and pretend we don't see the collectivity by these Black Canadian women when they want to mitigate the oppression within financial systems and self-fund their own projects. So I'm trying to interfere with Canada's story on the social economy, and rightly so, particularly because we have a history, a legacy of cooperation from the Desjardins movement to our anti-Ganesh movement, but we just don't want to hear about the ROSCA phenomenon, sue, box, hand, chit, and all these kind of things. It's inconvenient, I think. And so what these women have in common across the Caribbean and Canada is that these are cherished cooperative systems. They see themselves as members, participating, structuring debate, organizing and pooling funds on a fixed period. Everyone understands the governance structure. We can say informal, but there are actually very formalized structural and governance arrangements taking place below the surface for a variety of reasons. I think many of you may have read Portfolios of the Poor. It's a book that got a lot of fanfare, rightly so. It interviewed hundreds of people, mostly in the Global South, to learn about the financial diaries of low-income people. Over and over again, these ROSCA systems were continually very important. So it amazes me when we get all these books written on economic inclusion, and we're never, ever thinking about the cooperative institutions that people in these communities are building ground up. In fact, these systems are so admired in the Caribbean that elite bankers, from Canadian banks to Jamaican or Haitian, they'll actually copy these ROSCA systems, meaning that they'll create product lines because they know the majority of their citizens use these localized cooperative systems. It's a way of expanding their market niche. Mummy here in Grenada, and the book is going to be littered with all kinds of testimonials. Of course, we're going to go through sort of the risks of what these ROSCA systems look like. I don't have enough time to do that today. But what I'm trying to do is make the case and show you why these ROSCAs are so valued and defended by the women who use them. Mummy is here telling you it's the underlying importance. She's a spice trader in Grenada. The underlying importance of these ROSCA or SUSU systems is trust. These are not educated women in a formal sense, but they have years of experience as being entrepreneurs and business women, tending to their own needs, assisting community out of love and reciprocity, but not focused on the profit motive. They're looking at cooperation and member participation. In the Caribbean, it's not a glorious story. There's all kinds of inequities and exclusions occurring. There's anti-Black racism in certain contexts. But these systems create a way out for people when formal or targeted poverty alleviation programs just don't work. People have their susu or box hand systems to assist them to meet their livelihood needs, but also to repair the harms that are happening in society that you can't get through mainstream systems because the very root of it has been corrupt or detrimental to their own health. In Canada, just as the banker ladies in Jamaica, the Caribbean, have been doing a lot of work in terms of dealing with politicized financing issues, in Canada, the story is very different. I expected to see something else because it's such a country that prides its cooperative traditions. But in fact, the banker ladies of Canada has been the hardest, most humbling piece of work I have done as an academic, to see these women in completely vulnerable situations, and I'm speaking life or death situation. And this is Toronto the Good, right? Women are being stigmatized, they are being labeled gamblers, they're being labeled as drug mules, as terrorists, particularly from the Somali and Jamaican communities. I mean, I'm often an expert witness for cases because people don't understand what mutual aid and ROSCAs and informal cooperative institutions are. These women themselves here will tell you they know they're being stigmatized. They know the work that they are doing is radical because they're fighting intense forms of oppression, but they're not trying to be on anyone's victim list because they are going to create and build things that many of us don't even comprehend what they're trying to do because these have ancestral legacies, right? I'm going to let them speak to you.
But also, so if you have it in your country, you still bring it. So when you go, you meet people from your country, you say, oh, you remember Ososo? You say, yes. Do you remember when we used to read back home? So why don't we do it back?
So we developed a structure that was different, slightly different than the one that my mom and her friends used.
A youth taught means help. When we have a group of 10 of women to $200, I get the $2,000.
That makes me independent. I feel a power. Say, I have something.
So that's the Banker Ladies film. I'm by no means creative, but when I do my community work, these women were like, all these books that you write, useless, zero. You need to change mindset, and we're going to help you do that. I said, well, then you're going to star in this film. And so this is open access. It's been funded by the Canadian government. It's a 20-minute documentary. Get the word out. The Banker Ladies, they're really teaching us about what economic cooperation can be and actually is in our world. So we're dealing in an era of anti-Black racism. Everyone's all twisted up. They can't quite figure out how do we undo this. But the Banker Ladies have been hard at work for centuries doing this work. In the West, outside of the West, they've just been dealing with structural inequality. That's what they've been dealing with. But how now do we include them in our community economic development programs that are often subsidized? No, we're not doing that. We actually expect Black women who are marginalized, low income, working in all these hero-type jobs to receive their minimum wage pay and still do this civil society building work to keep our country strong. And this is happening in Canada, it's happening in Europe, it's happening in the US, right? How my work is now thinking, why are we not remunerating these women? This is community economic development work that they're doing. They're building politicized, engaged citizens. The young generation here, Muna Abukar and Andrea Barrett, are two of these women hail from Somali and Jamaican backgrounds, Canadians as Canadians can be. They're using the funds from these ROSCA systems to assist them so that they can run for political office. Imagine that, informal institutions using the money that are deemed illegal to help them run for political office so that they can bring social justice change. So I'm learning. As an academic, tenured, holding a Canada Research Chair, I still don't even know what I'm doing. But what I do know that I am a scribe for these women because they're actually teaching us lessons about how to be better humans, how to understand that money is just a part, we're only here for a small while. So why don't we figure out how we prioritize people's needs first? And then we'll figure out how we develop our communities, right? And don't assume that the knowledge isn't there. It's always there. And so what Fardosa is telling you here, Somali-born, is that people might look at this Hagbad Bank as something strange and different. But it's not. It's about social well-being. It's just not an economic financial transaction. It's about curing the harms that people have endured in the marketplace, creating a forum for people to become engaged citizens and uplift one another. That's the human economy. That's how we humanize economics, right? That's thinking about social provisioning, right? It goes beyond just how much is in our bank account, right? So what they're trying to do is teach us these tools, but we're not seeing them, particularly in the Canadian context. And what we do know is that we don't have to start from scratch. Development assistance, I teach in global development at U of T. We're always teaching about, there's always this idea that it goes one way, from the north to the south. No. We need to now ask Kerala, India, how they were managed to do the Kundambashri system and get the political buy-in to bring in low-caste women to participate in development plans. Ghana has centuries-old SUSU system that has premier economists are thinking through part of its system to make it a part of their formal system. Not all of it. They have applied a very pragmatic approach because informality is okay. And finally, South Africa is like, we need to do training and capacity building to have a national stockpile system and to make people recognize that this is a part of your ecosystem for financial goods, right? And so finally, I leave you here with this. These are women that I have been working with for years, and they have changed me as an academic in a fundamental way because I see the stressors of life. I know the risks that they endure and the harms with police raids continually is happening in low-income communities across the Americas, even in my own city of Toronto. And we, in last year, formed the Banker Ladies Council of 2022. And now I take a back seat, and they're educating the Canadian public about what it means to start and create a ROSCA system, not just for Black folk in the Americas, but we're now finding Iranian women are like coming out of the woodworks. Latinas are like, hey, we do tandas. So we're finding that this is a system. Canadian women are like, I'm low income, I'm white. How can I join this group? This is a system that we're thinking for all women who want to put back the reciprocity and trust in the ways in which we organize finance in our communities. Most days I'm at Toronto, University of Toronto, Scarborough. That's where I spend my days. I'm a part of the Diverse Solidarity Economies Collective, a group of, you can Google it, a group of feminist economists who are really thinking about how we decolonize economics or make it more plural is the way we like to say it. You can email me, contact me any which way. I'd like it. Thanks, blessings.